before, I'm Phil Schneider. I'm an ex-government worker who worked 17 years in the Black Projects, otherwise known as the Skunk Works. I worked predominantly helping to design and build extremely deep underground military bases. Thank you. Give you a short overview of my background. I'm a structural engineer, both aerospace as well as military applications. Graduate of University of Missouri as well as University of Manchester, England. That's about it for me. I worked in Vietnam, got torn pieces, shot, whatever. Took 5 years to recuperate, came back, patched me up, so to speak. Went to work for Morrison Knudsen, and from Morrison Knudsen I worked also with EG&G, Bechtel, Aerospatiale of France. Also worked with Fiat for a while, cars by Fiat. I did a lot of work overseas, but predominantly my field was underground mountain basing, also submarine basing. I wrote several treatises on analyzing rock formations by grain structure, and this grain structure would yield a certain pattern, and that certain pattern could be used to analyze and chemically analyze and make special explosives that could be used to blast out large caverns underground, and even when there were caverns, you could still use shape charges to blast inert rock, although a lot of it was done by laser tunneling and drilling. I have a copy of a book here. I can't sell it, it's my only copy, but this fellow could corroborate with me. His name is Richard Souder, PhD. He can corroborate with me in regards to everything I'm talking about.
Who is it by?
Richard Souder, PhD.
Here's another man that
Okay,
couldn't find the room. You need to give him your ticket.
I will.
And all that.
I guess I'll let you know that kind of the background of my father. My father was a German U-boat captain, responsible for the sinking of 141 Allied boats, and he got captured by the French, then turned over to Third Army, U.S., and then Third Army turned him over to Naval Intelligence, based out of Pensacola, Florida at the time. He later went to work also in Navy Black Projects. Maybe that's where I started, but it just worked out that way, I guess. Anyway, he worked for naval operations. He worked on the infamous Philadelphia experiment. He was involved heavily with that. In fact, I have some of his original notes. Get it here. Wait a second here. I thought I included them, but I guess I didn't. Strange, they were right here, too. Oh, here they are. These are some of the original notes that he had to go to school to learn them at Berkeley. And they were discussing things like element 104, 105 way back in 1950, so obviously that school was a little more accelerated than schools normally of that particular day, both in atomic physics and also in time variancy. Anyway, my father continued continued to work in the U.S. Navy up until a couple of years before he died. He died 2 years ago, 1993, May of 93. And, but his main contribution, other than the Philadelphia experiment, was that he was one of the principal engineers with the first nuclear submarine, the USS Nautilus. And he worked with Hyman Rickover on that project to its fullest from start to finish. He helped design the nuclear reactor, he helped design the metals, the containment vessel. He did all the machining of the uranium pellets that were used. He designed the hull predominantly and some of the graving docks, so he was a major contributor and such. It's such today that even his ideas in air conditioning and filtration are still used today in all nuclear submarines in the United States. So, that's so much for my father. He taught me a lot. He's a pretty silent fellow over time. He told me that I shouldn't work in black projects in the desert regions. Of course, I told him, I'm sorry, I have to work for a living. And in the early 60s, mid-60s, construction work would have been paid really tremendously. And that's where I got to start. One thing led to another. And when I went over to Vietnam, I got 10 times what a normal construction worker would get. But then the risk was pretty big too. And when I got hurt and recuperated, some 5 years later, I got hurt in 1970, and by 1975 I was bouncing around again. And so at that time I went to work for a number of contractors who were primarily underground base builders. And of course, I might give you a brief overview. The first underground bases were basically old gold mines. Just the tunnels were already there. The first missile base, as a matter of fact, I believe it was in northern Montana. It was an old gold and silver mine. And the missiles are still in the old air shafts. The air shafts are re-drilled out and everything. They made a semi-hardened missile base out of an old gold mine, which is kind of unique in some ways. Well, first, basically, the main part of the talk will deal with what I faced underground. Is there anybody here that is in the frame of mind that they can't take gore or that kind of thing? If there is, there might be a problem because I'm going to get rather graphic.
I don't like it, but I can say that.
Okay, I'll tone it down a bit. This workshop basically is everything that I missed in the main talk yesterday, and of course it's pretty hard to cram 3.5 or 4 hours talk in 50 minutes. I've divided a talk into three topics. I'm going to talk about dumb bases, deep underground military bases, call them dumb bases.